Sarah Chen felt the cold metal of her ship's wall against her back as another explosion shook the bridge. Red lights flashed everywhere and alarms screamed warnings that nobody could hear anymore. Most of her crew was already dead. The rest would be soon. She pulled herself to the main screen and watched her worst nightmare come true. The human fleet was losing. Ships exploded one by one in bright flashes against the black of space. Each flash meant hundreds of people she knew were gone forever. The Kethver had tricked them all. 3 hours ago, this battle was supposed to be humanity's greatest victory. Intelligence reports said the alien fleet was weak and ready to surrender. The diplomatic channels had been open for weeks. The Kethver had even agreed to follow the rules of war. No targeting medical ships. No killing prisoners. No using civilians as shields. All lies. Sarah watched through her cracked helmet as another human cruiser died. The aliens had filled their ships with human prisoners. Every time the human fleet tried to attack, they saw their own people tied to the outside of enemy ships. Children, elderly people, medical staff who had never held a weapon. The fleet commanders had hesitated. That moment of humanity had cost them everything. Her ship, the Defiant Echo, shuddered again. The life support was failing. The artificial gravity flickered on and off. Sarah floated toward the escape pod bay, but stopped when she saw movement on her scanner. The Kethver flagship was close. The massive ship called Bone Render moved like a giant metal beast between the wreckage. Its weapons had stopped firing. Now it was collecting things, collecting people. Sarah pressed her face to the small window and felt her heart stop. Escape pods drifted toward the alien ship like fish caught in a net. She could see human faces. Inside the clear metal spheres, some were injured. Some were unconscious. All of them were helpless. The Bone Render opened its cargo bay like a hungry mouth. Biopods lined the inside walls. Sarah had read the intelligence reports about those pods. The Kethver used them to keep prisoners alive during transport. Alive, but not comfortable.
House.
The pods could keep a human breathing for months while their bodies were slowly prepared for experiments. She watched pod after pod disappear into the alien ship. Then she saw a face that made her blood freeze. Through the clear metal of one escape pod, she could see her brother Marcus looking back at her. Marcus was supposed to be safe. His medical frigate was stationed far behind the battle lines. He was a Marine, but he worked as a medic now. He saved lives instead of taking them. He had no business being in an escape pod in the middle of a war zone. Sarah pressed the communication button on her suit, but only static came back. The Kethver were blocking all signals. She could only watch as her little brother disappeared into the alien ship. The betrayal burned in her chest. WORSE, then her broken ribs. The Kethver had promised to honor surrender. They had promised to treat prisoners with respect. They had lied about everything. Every diplomatic message had been a trick to get humans to lower their guard. Her ship's computer spoke in a calm voice that made everything worse. Life support failure in 20 minutes. Oxygen levels critical. Recommend immediate evacuation. Sarah looked around her dead ship. The escape pods were gone. The shuttle bay was destroyed. Her suit had maybe 6 hours of air left, but in any normal situation, she would record a final message for her family and wait for the cold sleep of space to take her. But Marcus was on that ship. Marcus and hundreds of other humans who trusted their military to protect them. They were going to die slowly. In alien laboratories, unless someone stopped it. Sarah pulled herself through the destroyed corridors of her ship to the supply room. Most of the equipment was broken, but she found what she needed. A repair kit, extra air bottles, emergency rations, a small cutting torch. She moved to the engineering section and started pulling apart the ship's systems. The artificial gravity? The generator still worked. Emergency thrusters had some fuel left. The shield generator was damaged but not dead. For the next 4 hours, Sarah worked like a woman possessed. She ripped components out of the walls and rebuilt them into something new. Something that had never been tried before. Something that might kill her before she even started. When she finished, She had created a weapon out of her dying ship. The Defiant Echo was no longer a cruiser. It was a missile. A very smart missile with a human brain guiding it. Sarah strapped herself into the pilot's chair and looked at the scanner one more time. The Kethver fleet was moving away from the battle zone. They had collected all the prisoners they wanted. Now they would take them to processing centers where humans would be turned into biological weapons. She thought about Marcus. About the promise she had made to their parents to keep him safe. About all the other families who would never see their loved ones again. Sarah's hands moved across the controls. The dead ship came alive one last time. Its engines fired in a direction that made no sense to enemy sensors. Its damaged shields flickered into existence, just long enough to hide her heat signature. The Defiant Echo began to drift toward the wreckage field like another piece of dead metal. But inside, Sarah, Chen was very much alive, and she had work to do. The hunt was about to begin. 3 weeks had passed since the battle at Kepler Ridge. Sarah Chen was no longer the clean military officer who had commanded a starship. Now she looked like something pulled from a scrapyard. Her new ship was barely worthy of the name. Had built it from the remains of 3 different human vessels. The cockpit came from a destroyed fighter. The engines were torn from a dead transport. The life support system wheezed and clicked with every breath she took, but it flew. More importantly, it was invisible. Sarah had learned things about stealth technology that no human engineer had ever tried. She wrapped her tiny ship in materials that absorbed scanner signals. She rerouted the engine exhaust through cooling tubes that made her heat signature look like space debris. She even painted the hull with a mixture of metals that made it bend. Light in strange ways, the Kethver called her ship the Silent Death. Sarah called it the Wasp. She drifted through the shipping lanes like a ghost, watching alien convoys move supplies between their worlds. Each convoy was protected by warships that could destroy entire human fleets. But Sarah was not trying to fight fleets. She was hunting information. Her first target was a small supply ship guarded by only 2 fighters. Sarah waited until they passed through an asteroid field, then struck like lightning. The Wasp emerged from behind a spinning rock and attached itself to the supply ship's hull. Sarah cut through the metal with her torch and slipped, sighed before the guards even knew she was there. The alien crew never saw her coming. She moved through their ship like smoke, disabling their communications and weapons. When the last Kethver was unconscious, Sarah dragged the captain to the medical bay and began her interrogation. The aliens were reptiles that stood on 2 legs like humans, but their skin was green and covered with small scales. Their eyes were yellow and moved independently of each other. Their mouths were full of sharp teeth designed for tearing meat. Sarah had learned their language by listening to captured communications. During the battle, now she spoke to the captain in his own words. "Where do you take human prisoners?" she asked. The captain hissed at her. "Humans are weak. You will all die slowly in our laboratories." Sarah smiled without humor. "Maybe, but you will die right here if you do not answer my questions." It took 6 hours of careful questioning before the captain broke. He told her about the processing stations where humans were taken apart for biological research. He told her about the experiments that turned human prisoners into living weapons. He told her about Flesh Harbor. Flesh Harbor was the largest processing facility in Kethver space. It could hold 50,000 prisoners at once. Most importantly, it was where they took military prisoners for special projects. If Marcus was still alive, he would be there. Sarah took everything useful from the supply ship and spaced the crew. She felt nothing as she watched them drift away into the black. They had made their choice when they decided to experiment on her people. Her second target was a communication relay station. Sarah spent days studying its defenses before she made her move. The station was built inside a small moon and protected by automated weapons. But Sarah had advantages that the Kethver had never encountered. Humans could survive in conditions that would kill most aliens. Sarah shut down her ship's life support and let the Wasp become as cold as space itself. The station's sensors could not detect her frozen ship as it drifted past their weapons. She landed on the dark side of the moon and walked across its surface in her suit. The gravity was so weak that each step carried her dozens of meters. She found an old mining tunnel and followed it deep into the rock. The relay station was filled with computers that processed messages from across the Kethfer Empire. Sarah plugged her stolen equipment into their systems and began copying everything: military orders, supply schedules, personnel records, and most important of all, the locations of every prison facility in their territory. She found Marcus in the files. He was listed as Test Subject 4847 at Flesh Harbor. The file said he was being prepared for neuromodification experiments. Sarah's hands shook as she read the details. They were going to turn her brother into a living computer, but the files also gave her something else: complete technical specifications for Kethfer ships and weapons, guard schedules for their facilities, even the personal communications of their military commanders. Sarah learned that the aliens were afraid of her. Reports called her an impossible enemy that struck without warning and disappeared like smoke. Some commanders had started requesting transfers away from the shipping lanes. Others were demanding more guards for their convoys. Fear was a weapon that Sarah could use. Her third target was a command, a ship carrying a Kethfer admiral. Sarah followed the ship for days, learning its patrol pattern. When it stopped to refuel at a remote station, she made her move. The Wasp attached to the command ship's hull like a parasite. Sarah cut her way inside and moved through the corridors with practiced silence. She avoided the crew quarters and headed straight for the Admiral's office. Admiral. The Gvar was a large Kethfer, with scars covering his neck and arms. He was studying tactical reports when Sarah appeared behind him like a shadow. "Hello, Admiral," she said in perfect Kethfer. "We need to talk." Gah. The alien tried to reach for his weapon, but Sarah was faster. She pressed her cutting torch against his throat. "I want to know about Flesh Harbor," she said. "Security codes, guard rotations, weak points in the defenses. You are going to tell me everything." Admiral Dekfer stared at her with his yellow eyes. "You are the Silent Death." "I am Sarah Chen," she replied, "and I am coming for my people." The interrogation lasted all night. By morning, Sarah had everything she needed to reach Flesh Harbor. She left the Admiral alive, but took his personal shuttle. Let him explain to his superiors how a single human had walked onto his ship and stolen his vessel. As Sarah flew toward the processing station, she thought about Marcus, about all the humans suffering in alien laboratories, about the choice she had made 3 weeks ago to become something other than human. The hunt was almost over. Soon it would be time for war. Flesh Harbor looked like a metal cancer growing on the side of an asteroid. The station stretched 4 kilometers in every direction, with massive arms reaching out into space like the legs of a dead spider. Ships came and went constantly, bringing new prisoners and taking away finished products. Sarah watched from the shadow of a nearby moon, her stolen shuttle hidden among the ice crystals of the asteroid belt. She had been studying the station for 2 days, learning its patterns and weaknesses. What she saw made her stomach turn. The station was not just a prison, it was a factory. A factory that used living beings as raw materials. Through her scope, Sarah could see processing bays where alien workers in protective suits moved between rows of transparent tubes. Each tube held a different species. Some were awake and screaming silently in the vacuum. Others floated unconscious in green liquid that kept their bodies alive while machines worked on them. The humans were kept in a separate section. Sarah counted at least 3,000 in the tubes she could see. Men and women of all ages, suspended in the same green fluid. Cables ran from their heads to computer systems that recorded their thoughts and memories. But the worst part was the conversion chambers. These were where finished prisoners became something else entirely. Sarah watched in horror as a human woman was removed from her tube and placed on a metal table. Alien surgeons worked quickly, replacing parts of her body with mechanical components. When they finished, the woman stood up and walked away with jerky, unnatural movements. Her eyes glowed with electronic light. Sarah forced herself to look away and focus on her mission. She had to find Marcus before this place turned him into a machine. The station's defenses were impressive. Energy shields protected the main hull. Weapon platforms floated nearby, ready to destroy any attacking ship. Guard towers dotted the surface. It was filled with soldiers who watched for threats. But Sarah was not planning to attack the station. She was planning to sneak inside, using the codes she had stolen from Admiral Vekfer. Sarah guided her shuttle to a maintenance dock on the station's underside. The automated systems accepted her clearance and opened a small bay door. She landed between two garbage haulers and powered down her engines. Sarah put on a stolen HFY uniform and activated a holographic disguise that made her look like one of the alien workers. The device was crude, but it would fool casual observation. She clipped a fake ID badge to her uniform and walked into the station like she belonged there. The corridors of Flesh Harbor were filled with the sounds of industry. Machines hummed constantly. Alien voices echoed from speaker systems. Sometimes Sarah heard other sounds that made her hands clench into fists, screams, crying, the wet noise of surgical equipment. She followed the signs toward the human processing section, moving carefully to avoid the security cameras. Her stolen uniform helped her blend in with the other workers, but she could not risk a close inspection. The first checkpoint was guarded by two HFY soldiers. Sarah approached them with confidence, showing her fake ID and speaking in their language. "Delivery for Section 7, she said. "Priority materials for the neural extraction project." The guards looked bored. They waved her through without checking her credentials carefully. Sarah walked past them and entered the human section of the station. The smell hit her first. It was the smell of fear and pain and death mixed together into something that made her want to vomit. The air was thick with chemicals that kept the prisoners unconscious. Emergency lights cast everything in a red glow that made the scene look like something from hell. Thousands of tubes lined the walls of massive chambers. Each tube held a human being in various stages of processing. Some were recent arrivals who looked almost normal. Others had been there longer and showed signs of modification. Missing limbs replaced with metal. Extra organs growing from there. Backs. Brain tissue exposed and connected to wires. Sarah moved through the chambers like a ghost, checking the identification numbers on each tube. She had memorized Marcus's prisoner number from the stolen files. 4847. She repeated it in her head. Like a prayer as she searched row after row of tubes, she found him in chamber 12. Marcus floated in the green fluid with his eyes closed and tubes running down his throat. Wires came out of the back of his head and connected to a computer that displayed his brain activity. But he was alive. He was whole. The aliens had not started cutting on him yet. Sarah pressed her hand against the glass and felt tears running down her face. Her little brother looked so young and helpless in the tube. She remembered teaching him to ride a bicycle when he was 7 years old. She remembered him graduating from medical school and swearing to save lives. A voice behind her spoke in HFY. "Worker 7231, what are you doing here?" Sarah turned to see a supervisor approaching. The alien wore the blue uniform of station security and carried a weapon on his belt. His yellow eyes studied her with suspicion. "Routine inspection," Sarah replied in perfect HFY. "Now checking the neural connection quality on recent arrivals." The supervisor looked at his tablet. "I show no scheduled inspections for this shift." Sarah's hand moved slowly toward the cutting torch hidden under her uniform. There must be some mistake in the records. "Yes," the supervisor said, reaching for his communicator. "There must be." Sarah struck faster than the alien could react. Her torch burned through his throat before he could make a sound. She caught his body as it fell and dragged it behind a bank of computers. But the damage was done. Sarah's presence would be discovered soon. She had minutes before security arrived. She turned back to Marcus's tube and began studying the release mechanism. The controls were labeled in HFY, but Sarah had learned to read their technical manuals. She found the emergency release and began the extraction sequence. Alarms started blaring throughout the station. Marcus's tube began to drain. The green fluid flowed away and the glass front slid open. Her brother fell forward into Sarah's arms, unconscious but breathing. She pulled the tubes from his throat and mouth, then slapped his face gently. "Marcus, wake up. We have to go." His eyes opened slowly. For a moment he looked confused, then he focused on her face. "Sarah." His voice was weak and rough. "What did you get here?" "Long story," she said, helping him stand. "Can you walk?" Marcus nodded, though his legs shook with effort. "The others." "We can't leave the others." Sarah looked around at the thousands of tubes filled with human prisoners. Her heart broke, but she knew the truth. She could save Marcus, but she could not save them all. "Not yet. I'll come back for them," she promised. "But first we have to get out of here alive." The sound of running feet echoed from the corridor. Kethver's security forces were closing in. Sarah helped Marcus toward an emergency exit, but she knew they would never make it to her shuttle in time. That was when she saw the explosive charges she had been planting throughout the station during her search. Small devices attached to critical systems, enough to cripple Flesh Harbor, but not enough to destroy it completely. Sarah smiled grimly and pulled out the detonator. Maybe she could not save everyone today, but she could make sure this place never processed another human being. "Hold on tight," she told Marcus. "This is going to be loud." The explosion ripped through Flesh Harbor like the fist of an angry god. Sarah felt the station shake around her as her charges destroyed power systems and life support processors. Emergency lights flickered and died. Gravity generators failed in sections, sending debris floating through the corridors. But Sarah's plan worked too well. The emergency locks sealed every section to prevent total station collapse. She and Marcus were trapped in the human processing wing with no way to reach her shuttle. "We're going to die here," Marcus said weakly. He was still recovering from weeks in the extraction tube and could barely stand. "No," Sarah replied, checking her weapon. "We're going to live, and they're going to pay." The first security team arrived within minutes. 6 Kethver soldiers in full combat armor came through the main entrance with weapons ready. They expected to find a saboteur trying to escape. Instead, they found Sarah Chen waiting for them in the shadows. The aliens had superior numbers and better equipment, but they had never fought someone who thought like Sarah. She used the station's damaged systems against them. When they tried to use their heat sensors, she opened coolant pipes that filled the air with freezing gas. When they activated their motion detectors, she threw pieces of floating debris to confuse the readings. The battle lasted 20 minutes. When it ended, 6 Kethver soldiers were dead, and Sarah had acquired better weapons. "How did you do that?" Marcus asked, staring at his sister in amazement. "I learned new skills," Sarah said simply. She handed him a captured weapon. "Do you remember how to shoot?" Marcus nodded, though his hands shook as he held the alien rifle. "Sarah, what happened to you? You're different." Sarah looked at her reflection in a broken screen. Her face was thinner now, marked with scars from her weeks in space. Her eyes were cold and hard like chips of ice. She had become something that scared even her own brother. "They changed me," she said. "When they took you away, they changed me into something that could find you." More alarms echoed through the station. Sarah knew that hundreds of guards would be coming soon. But she also knew something that Kethver did not. The explosion had damaged more than just the power systems. It had opened access to their computer networks. Sarah connected her stolen equipment to a terminal and began downloading everything: military codes, personnel files, technical specifications for their biological weapons. Most importantly, the locations of every Kethver facility that held human prisoners. "What are you doing?" Marcus asked. "Winning the war," Saray replied without looking away from the screen. The data showed her the full scope of the Kethver operation. They had captured over 2 million humans from Earth and the colonies. Most were being processed in facilities, like Flesh Harbor, but some were being used for something worse. The Kethver were building an army of biological weapons based on human DNA. They had learned to copy human adaptability and combine it with alien technology. The files showed creatures that looked like humans but were stronger, faster, and completely loyal to their alien masters, Sarah realized that Earth was not the Kethver's final target. They planned to use modified humans to conquer every other species in the galaxy. Humans would become the tools of their own extinction and the extinction of everyone else. "We have to warn people," Marcus said, reading over her shoulder. "We will," Sarah promised. "But first, we finish what we started." Here, the download completed just as the next wave of security forces arrived. This time the Kethver brought heavy weapons and combat robots. Sarah and Marcus retreated deeper into the processing center. Using the maze of tubes and machinery for cover, the aliens made a critical mistake. They assumed Sarah was trying to escape, so they focused their forces on blocking the exits. Did not realize she was moving toward the station's central core. Sarah had studied the technical specifications. During her planning, she knew that Flesh Harbor was powered by a biological reactor that converted organic matter into energy. Same reactor that processed human prisoners could be turned into a massive bomb if someone knew which systems to overload. "You're not planning what I think you're planning," Marcus said as they reached the reactor chamber. "I'm planning exactly what you think I'm planning," Sarah replied, working on the control systems. "This station has to be destroyed completely. All the research data, all the biological samples, everything." "But the prisoners," Marcus protested. "There are thousands of humans still in the tubes." Sarah's hand stopped moving on the controls. She had not allowed herself to think about the prisoners since the escape began. Now she faced the terrible choice that had haunted her dreams for weeks. She could save Marcus and escape. Let the other prisoners live in tubes while the Kethver turned them into weapons. Or she could destroy the station and everyone in it, including the people she had come to rescue. "I know," she said quietly. "But if we don't stop this here, they'll do the same thing to billions of others." "The prisoners are already dead, Marcus. We're just deciding how they're going to die." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded and began helping her with the reactor controls. The overload sequence would take 10 minutes to complete. Sarah set it to give them enough time to reach an escape pod. But as they turned to leave, she saw something that changed. Everything. A group of human prisoners had been released from their tubes by the explosions. They were confused and weak, but they were awake. Some were helping others who could not walk. They were trying to escape on their own. Sarah watched a woman helping an elderly man toward an exit that had been sealed by the emergency systems. She saw a teenage boy carrying a child who could not stand. These people were not weapons or test subjects. They were human beings who wanted to live. "Sarah," Marcus said urgently, "we have to go. The reactor will explode in 8 minutes. Looked at her brother, then at the escaping prisoners, then at the reactor controls. She made a decision that surprised even herself. "You go," she told Marcus. "Take my shuttle and get back to human space. Tell them what you saw here. Show them the data I downloaded." "I'm not leaving without you," Marcus said firmly. "Yes, you are," Sarah replied, pulling out her weapon. "Because one of us has to survive to stop this from happening again, and one of us has to stay to help these people escape." Before Marcus could argue, Sarah stunned him with a low-power blast from her rifle.
Oh.
She caught his unconscious body and dragged him toward the nearest escape pod bay. As she loaded her brother into the pod, Sarah thought about the choice she was making. She could probably escape if she left now, but hundreds of innocent people would die because she was not there to help them. Sarah had spent weeks becoming a weapon of vengeance. Now she chose to be something else. Something human. She launched Marcus's pod toward the shuttle and turned back into the dying station. 5 minutes until the reactor exploded. Time enough to save some people, even if she could not save them all. The hunt was over. Now came the harder part. Now came the choice. To remain human in a galaxy that rewarded monsters. Sarah ran through the collapsing corridors of Flesh Harbor with 3 human prisoners following behind her. The reactor would explode in 2 minutes, and they were still 50 meters from the nearest escape pod. The woman prisoner was supporting an injured man who could barely walk. The teenage boy carried a small girl who was unconscious from the experiments. All of them trusted Sarah to get them out alive. even though she was not sure she could save herself. "This way," Sarah shouted over the alarms, leading them down a maintenance corridor. The main passages were blocked by debris. She had memorized the station's layout during her planning. They reached the escape pod bay with 30 seconds to spare. Sarah pushed the prisoners into the last working pod and sealed the door behind them. As she reached for the launch controls, she saw her reflection in the pod's window. Her face was covered with cuts and burn marks. Her stolen uniform was torn and bloody. But her eyes still held something that the Kethver could never understand. Or destroy. Hope. The pod launched just as the reactor exploded. Sarah woke up floating in space, surrounded by the wreckage of Flesh Harbor. Her emergency suit had saved her life, but barely. The explosion had thrown her clear of the station, but also damaged her life support systems. She had maybe an hour of air left, in the distance. She could see the lights of Kethver rescue ships collecting survivors from the destroyed station. But they were not looking for human escapees. They were focused on saving their own people and their research data. Sarah activated her suit's emergency beacon and waited. Either Marcus would find her, or she would die in the cold of space. After everything she had done, both outcomes seemed acceptable. 20 minutes later, she saw a familiar shape approaching through the debris field. Her stolen shuttle moved carefully between the floating wreckage, its scanners searching for her signal. Marcus had made it to the ship and come back for her. "I told you to go home," Sarah said, when Marcus pulled her into the shuttle's airlock. "I never was good at following orders," Marcus replied, helping her out of the damaged suit. "Besides, someone has to keep you from getting killed." As the shuttle flew away from the ruins of Flesh Harbor, Sarah looked at the data she had downloaded. From the station's computers, the information was more valuable than any weapon. It showed the locations of every Kethver facility in their empire, their military codes, their biological weapons research, everything humanity needed to fight back. But it also showed her something else that changed everything. Deep in the Kethver genetic databases, Sarah found files that made no sense at first. Research projects that studied human DNA not to copy it, but to understand it. Comparative analysis between humans and every other species the aliens had conquered. The truth was written in scientific data that took Sarah hours to understand. Humans were not just another species the Kethver planned to destroy. They were the original template. Every biological weapon the Kethver had created was based on human genetics. Every modified soldier in their army carried human DNA. Every species they had improved through their experiments was an attempt to recreate what humans had naturally. Humanity was not the victim of Kethver expansion. They were the goal. "They've been looking for us for 1,000 years, Sarah explained to Marcus as she showed him the data. Every species they conquered was a step toward finding Earth. We're not just another target, we're the final piece they needed to become perfect." Marcus stared at the genetic charts in amazement. "So when they found us, they found their holy grail," Sarah finished. "A species that already had everything they were trying to create through surgery and genetic modification. Natural adaptability, emotional resilience, creative problem solving, what they wanted to become." The shuttle's communication system activated, receiving a priority message on all frequencies. Sarah recognized the voice immediately. It was High Commander Vextar, the leader of the entire Kethver Empire. "Human-designated Sarah Chen," the alien voice said in perfect English. "We know you are listening. We have an offer for you." Sarah looked at Marcus, then activated the communication array. "I'm listening. You have caused significant damage to our operations," the High Commander continued. "But you have also proven the superiority of unmodified human capabilities. We offer you a choice. Surrender yourself for study, and we will release 1 million human prisoners. Continue your resistance, and we will begin processing all remaining humans immediately." Sarah felt the weight of 2 million lives pressing down on her. Every human prisoner in Kethver space depended on her decision. She could sacrifice herself and save half of them, or she could fight and watch them all die. "In alien laboratories, there's a third option," Sarah said into the communicator. "Explain," the High Commander replied. Sarah activated the shuttle's main transmitter and began broadcasting on every frequency in the galaxy. Not just to the Kethver, but to every species that could receive the signal. "My name is Sarah Chen," she said. "I am a human being, and I speak for my people. For the past month, I have gathered evidence of Kethver war crimes against humanity and dozens of other species. I am transmitting that evidence now to every government and military force. In known space, she uploaded terabytes of data from Flesh Harbor, videos of the experiments, records of biological weapons programs, proof that the Kethvar had been using prisoners of war as raw materials for weapons designed to destroy other civilizations. The Kethver Empire has violated every law of civilized warfare," Sarah continued. "They have committed genocide against entire species. They have turned prisoners into weapons of mass destruction. Today, I call upon every free nation in the galaxy to join humanity in bringing these criminals to justice." The communication channel was silent for a long moment. Then High Commander Vexstar spoke again, and for the first time, his voice carried fear. "You have doomed your species, human. We will destroy every colony world. We will hunt down every survivor. Humanity will become extinct because of your pride." "Maybe," Sarah said calmly, "but you're forgetting something important. You've spent 1,000 years looking for us because you needed us. We're the one species you can't afford to destroy completely. And now the entire galaxy knows what you really are." Within hours, Sarah's broadcast reached governments across known space. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Species that had been enemies for centuries united against the common threat of Kethver. Biological weapons. The war that followed lasted 3 years. Sarah became the human representative to the Galactic Alliance, helping coordinate the liberation of prison worlds and the prosecution of war criminals. She never returned to military command, but she never stopped fighting. For justice, Marcus established medical facilities on freed worlds, helping former prisoners recover from their experiences. He often said that his sister had saved more than just his life. She had saved his faith in humanity's ability to choose what was right over what was easy. The Kethver Empire collapsed when their own people learned the truth about their governments. Crimes. Some aliens chose exile rather than face trial. Others helped build a new society based on cooperation instead of conquest. Sarah's scars never fully healed. The months of fighting alone had changed her in ways that peace could not undo. But she learned to live with the darkness she had carried, knowing that it had been necessary to preserve the light for others. On quiet nights, she would look up at the stars and remember the choice she had made in the reactor chamber of Flesh Harbor. The choice to remain human when it would have been easier to become a monster. That choice had saved the galaxy. But more importantly, it had saved her soul.